Hello, exiles. It's a beautiful day. Beautiful, beautiful day. Beautiful enough for me to take the hat off and let people laugh at the state of my hair, because it's been a little rough lately, but the game's getting better. Just kind of as a preface, we have the most recent passive upcoming changes, and there's a lot of really good stuff in here. A bunch of little balance things that, I mean, some people probably think don't go far enough, but they're making their moves, and they're going to make them slowly because, as we might have learned from a certain Zizarin Jonathan Mark interview, they like to make their move slowly because they feel like once they give us something, they can't take it away, which is, I mean, that's relatively kind of a fair thing to state. If you have not seen that interview, I'll put a link to it down to the description because it's quite good. I almost thought of making a video about it, but, you know, a lot of other people already did that, and quite frankly, Zizarin did just such a fantastic job talking to them that it really kind of omitted the need for it. It's take it as you will. We've kind of learned that Jonathan has very strong opinions on things, which we thought we knew, but now we know what the opinions are, and that's very useful for giving feedback and a number of other things. I think the biggest thing that we're talking about here in these upcoming balance changes, though, that I really want to bring up, because this was in the interview, is the rares in endgame, right? You have to kill all the rares in a map to proceed. They're just going to have those showing all the time, and that is a absolutely fantastic change. I would have put that in this video if it weren't already happening. But this isn't about that. These are the changes we know are coming, and while they're nice, I think there are some things in the game that really need to be looked at and considered on like a larger front for the health of it going forward. I did this during 0.1. I'm reprising it again, 0.2. 3 things to really improve the game. I believe back then, one of the things I'd actually suggested was just letting us being able to overwrite our runes, which they let us do, and I very much so appreciate that happening. Of course, some changes to the Ascendancy system and how charms and belts interact weren't quite so taken in by them, but, you know, it is what it is. 1 out of 3. If I could get 1 out of 3 of these picked up by GGG, I think people would be very happy. Now, this is an actual feedback video, Law on the Entertainment. I kind of hope someone at GGG will see this, and I kind of want to send the feedback to them in text form as well, alongside a link to the video so they can see it and understand where I'm coming from. But yeah, we're going to get right to it. The very, very first thing, and I think this is almost kind of a no-brainer, is that we need the resistance change harvest crafts in Path of Exile 2. That is one of those things that got added to Path of Exile 1, and it was such an impactful change that you really cannot compare it to anything else that's available anywhere in that game, or this one for that matter. In the interview that happened, and in other places, they've kind of talked about how resistance fixing is supposed to happen with runes. And that's okay if you want to talk about, like, crafting bench replacement, sure. I think runes are a little weak, and I think that was also mentioned. But this isn't about that. Changing your resistances on gear at endgame can be the difference between a piece of equipment being perfect for you and a piece of equipment being good enough that you now have to change every other piece of equipment. And that is just awful. No one wants to do that. There was a reason why it was so well received when it was added and why it's kind of stuck in the game to begin with. The thing is, everything we need to make this work and be added right now already exists. They're called omens, and versions that let you modify what a Chaos Orb will do already exists, and because of that, you could very easily make something like this. While this item is active in your inventory, your next Chaos Orb will remove a cold resistance modifier and add a fire resistance modifier of the same tier. It's perfect. Do I need to say anything more? It's just Omen of... I mean, I feel like I hit the name right too as well, but you make one of these for each resistance combination. There'll be 6 in total. Perfectly fine, perfectly acceptable. Maybe you even have a rarer tier where like you can change an elemental resistance to a chaos one. But that's a little more conjecture and kind of a little more wishful thinking. The thing that I really like about this idea, though, is this is something that can be relatively common from, what would you call it? Ritual gameplay as a reward that is specific to Ritual, but will maintain its value throughout the league, because people are going to be using these a lot. People use the craft and harvest a lot. It was, you know, I mean, harvest juice was valuable for a lot of reasons, but changing your resistances was a very definite one. Obviously, they have control over what the drop rate and rarity will be. That's perfectly fine, whatever they need to do to make them feel comfortable. But this function should be in the game somewhere, and the fact that it isn't is really a bit disconcerting, because it's hard enough, right, to hit that slam for resistance with an Exalted Orb. To hit the wrong resistance and have it just not fit your gear set, even though the rest of the item is perfect, that's like tragic. That's exceptionally tragic. There should be a way to work around that doesn't involve, I don't know. Well, I guess I guess there isn't a way to say that doesn't involve something, because there is no way to work around that in some situations. If it's a 40% cold res roll, you can't just change all your runes to make it fit, because the runes give you what, like 14% at the top tier per rune? You're probably using them for stuff already. It's just not a great system to use runes for resistance rolls that are that big and impactful, especially in the late game, and especially when they're very important and you can't really compromise on them, right? If your build needs a certain unique to function well, and that puts strain on your resistances, there have to be tools for us to work around that. Now, this next one is it's going to take a little bit of doing with the introduction to it. Basically, what I'm positing here is that Recombinators kind of have an inherent massive problem. I think anyone who's used it already kind of understands this. If you find two items with, like, really low weighting mods that you want to combine, the odds to get it together are really low. I think there's, like, a famous video of someone hitting a 3%er, right, for two very rare mods. But a 3%er on two separate bases hitting is so much more difficult to achieve in Path of Exile 2 than in its predecessor, because there's no orb of alteration. We can't repeatedly roll on the same base to get the mod that we need and then smash them together in one attempt. No, you have to find a new base every time, looking for that mod over and over and over again. And then when you get two, you have a 1 in 33 chance of it succeeding. 1 in 33 is a very big number. If it were 1 in 2, I wouldn't have anything to really complain about here, because if you get really unlucky, that sucks. But I mean, what, it's going to take you 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times? 1 in 33, the range of bad luck could mean it takes you 200 times instead of 33. That's going to happen to some people. That's a real big problem, and it reintroduces a problem from Path of Exile 1 that we specifically wanted to get rid of, and that's kind of how 6-linking worked, where the bad luck of not being able to get a 6-link was way too impactful on a character's progression through the game. The same way, getting gear is kind of really difficult right now in Path of Exile 2, and Recombinators are supposed to be a solution. We've introduced a solution that has brought back a problem. And I hate to say it, but I think the only way to go through with fixing this is to create a situation where you can guarantee success on the Recombinator. Yeah, that's a whopper of a statement. Probably one that will make Jonathan shrivel back, or potentially come to my home and attack me. Either way, I actually love the preview they show here. Chance for success 9.21%. 9.21. That's tragic. That is a tragic line of text. And I mean, the accuracy mod, while nice, this isn't like percent fizz and flat fizz. That was the mods in the 3% video. And what I notice about this, though, and what we should all notice about this, is the cost for this is 20 artifacts. It's nothing. It's dirt cheap. It doesn't exist. Why not some sort of variable cost to increase it? Or, even so, a fixed cost that just kind of guarantees it of something that would be very hard to build up to. Because one thing that's kind of nice about this is that its cost is measured in something you have to farm out yourself. You have to do all the work yourself to build it up. The community can't just pool resources. Someone actually has to do the whole journey themselves. And that's a great way to ensure that something takes a certain amount of effort to acquire. Of course, we don't want to create a TFT situation where the item is untradeable, so now you have to do everything through a service, right? You have to give your items to someone and trust they won't just take it. And then you have people building reputation in third-party shops and crazy moderators lording over everyone in their Discord channel. That is also bad. That is also what we don't want. But this is, again, something that's kind of easily solved, because you could very easily add something to the cost here that would be optional, right? Something that you add in to up the chance or guarantee it. And personally, I think they've kind of already set this up, because if you've done Expedition here in Path of Exile 2, you'll notice Sun artifacts don't really do much. You can use them to trade out for the other 3 artifacts, which are used for the various, either gambling or recombination. That's great. I think that's a great system, generally speaking, but Sun artifacts could do more. And I'm kind of proposing a high cost item that Danig would sell, right? Maybe you even need to use reroll currency every time you want to buy one, just to add a little bit more to it. Or maybe he doesn't always have it, but you actually have a reason to use reroll currency with him right now, because you can, but I don't think it does anything. So the cool thing about this, obviously, is you're giving more use for Sun artifacts. Danig becomes more valuable, maybe even way more valuable, because you're probably going to have to get a ton of these for this to be at all balanced. And then you get an item that you can trade to people that's worth a ton of money, or you can use it for yourself to guarantee a recombination hit, which is obviously going to be incredibly valuable and useful, but it also cements the amount of effort required to get it, right? The time investment from the player, without it being entirely luck based. Because when you have this level of variance, right? 1 in 10, some people are going to get it in 1 hit, some people are going to get it in 10 hits, some people are going to get it in 100 hits. And the person who takes 100 hits had to get that many more base types together, and it's just too difficult to do that. Like, especially in solo self-found, but even in trade, where if someone needs mods that are popular, items start to become valuable for weird reasons. And I think that's probably something that's already happening just from like the artifact costs being relatively low as they are. Hopefully that's a palatable alternative to what we have, because I've been in, you know, I've been in the linking scenario of Path of Exile 1, where I have an item that I need to progress on my character, and I need to get it 6-linked, and I just go way over the amount that it would normally take to 6-link it, and you're like, oh, well, you could just spend 1,500 fusings, and you're right, but you can't do that in Path of Exile 2, which is, I mean, part of why I'm making this suggestion. We have this in Path of Exile 1 as a stopgap fix to the linking problem. In Path of Exile 2, we have kind of the same linking problem with no stopgap fix. There should be that expensive force option. Otherwise, we're going to get situations where people play the game, they have a really bad experience, and they just leave. Because I've been the leaving party before. I refuse to use the... That's probably me being stupid, but I cannot stand using the crafting bench, because I know over time I am saving fusings by a boatload if I actually do it myself. And maybe that's also true with this, but definitely not in solo self-found. And definitely not in probably the most difficult to guarantee combinations. Because, I mean, this is 2 mods, right? There was a 2 mod that we're talking about from earlier, 3%. You can add a 3rd mod to that craft attempt. How are you supposed to do that, right? This is supposed to be like the gateway to the properly endgame gear, and we gotta do something to support that better. Now, the very last thing I want to bring up, the answers given in the interview, which I keep calling back to. This video isn't supposed to be about that, but it's what's current and what gives us the most up-to-date information on the devs' thoughts and intents. They were very, very reluctant to talk about player speed, but the fact of the matter is, the current state of the game, players need to be faster. And I'm talking like actual flat movement speed. We are just not quick enough. There's too much dead space to move around. The monsters are just a little bit too fast in like comparison to us. And just generally speaking, there are some mechanics in the late game especially where a flat out, 30% increased movement speed isn't enough. And some classes will have things like Blink to give them a little bit more leeway while they're working on it, but other classes don't. And that is something that really kind of vexes me. Tests of skill, obviously there's going to be variance in their difficulty when they come out at you randomly, but the variance should not be so tight that it shouldn't be so tight that perfect play is like only this much more pass to pass. Perfect play should make it look like it's easy, so that when people actually do it themselves, they're like, oh, this is way harder than I thought it would be. And that is kind of an issue with certain boss abilities. I think the Arbiter is actually a good example of this, where he'll make circles in the ground and they'll appear in different places, and he'll also do corridor stuff. And just, if that appears in an awkward spot and you don't have enough speed, you're kind of done. Because you can't mitigate those. You can't make room for your character to survive it. If you don't have the speed, you're done for. The question is, how do we fix that? And again, one last callback to the interview. Zizern had a fantastic idea of implicits on boots that get stronger as you get to higher and higher tiers of equipment. I think a slightly better option would be to just make side quest rewards for this, Done. Quicksilver draft. Grants 5% increased movement speed. You add this 2 places in the campaign, you get another 10% increased movement speed on every character in the game. That's going to be a tremendous benefit. It's not going to feel giant as you're getting it, but if you looked at the gameplay side by side across all the people, you're going to see a big difference. I was stuck on 10% movement speed boots for most of the campaign. I could have been stuck on 0%, and I couldn't even imagine that. 10% was like, okay, if that had been 20% in practice because of this, I would have had a much better time. That's just all there is to it. I have 20% now. If I had 30% because of this, I'd have a much better time. The people who have 30% movement speed boots would love to have another 10%. Obviously, we'd love to have way more than that. But we have to keep it small and incremental, because Jonathan is right in his assessment that if you gave too much, A, it's hard to take it back, and B, they really would have to rebalance everything. But a small increase, right, like this, is not difficult for the game to handle, right? It's not going to destabilize everything and make the game feel awful all of a sudden, but it is going to make players feel better, because honestly, our time is a little bit disrespected right now. It took me 20 hours to get to maps. 20 hours! I got to maps in 6 hours in my, like my leveling live streams that I did way back when for Dominating Blow, and that included all trials and everything. Took me 20 hours, man. And granted, like, Hunters had massive problems at the start, and there were big diva problems, and like, Act 1 and 2 were the worst leveling experience I've ever had in my life. But still, 20 hours is too long. 12 hours is like the upper end of what I would consider acceptable for someone who knows what they're doing. And to be perfectly honest, in this game, I know enough where if I'm knuckling down and actually trying, 12 hours should be achievable in the same way. And when I did the leveling for, what was it, Pillar of the Caged God, which was like the leveling meta back then, it was much faster. It was way faster, and it felt way better. That's the thing. It actually, like, every part of the campaign felt really good. Currently, every part of the campaign feels good up until about halfway through Act 2, where you realize how much more you have to do. And those fights that are interesting, right, the general combat that feels good in this game, most of the time at least, starts to drag, right? You need to shrink everything in relation to the combat if the combat slows down. And I think that might be something that is lost on GGG right now, but this right here is something they could do right now that wouldn't be that hard to implement, that would alleviate a lot of problems and make a lot of people very happy. It's the easiest win they could ever have. And another little note to add to that is just, the reason why I don't like the boot implicit idea is because A, if you get really good boots in the campaign, replacing them might be difficult. So you're going to lose out on that implicit. And B, certain unique items are going to be on lower tier bases, but they might have really valuable unique stats that you want to use even into endgame. And that kind of turns into like a compounding punishment to the player for making that choice, right? It's a nerf to things. It's going to be a nerf to something without consideration. And you shouldn't buff players without consideration, which is a great point by Jonathan, even though I feel like he's a little overzealous about it. But you also shouldn't nerf things without consideration as well, because really that's something that seems to be done over and over again by GGG across both Path of Exile 1 and its sequel now. And we really need to just avoid that sort of thing when possible, and this does that. This does that perfectly well. So anyway, that's all. I wanted to do a more positive video, something a bit more optimistic about the outlook, and this seemed like a good way to do it. I enjoyed doing it last League, I guess. I enjoyed doing it at release, so I'm happy to do this now. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope I can get some of this word out to the people in charge, because, I don't know, tell me what you think down below, if these are actually good ideas or not. Whether I follow up might actually come down to community opinion on this one, if I can get, enough people actually commenting. That would be very helpful. Have a good one, Exiles.